This is not about speeches or about talk, but it's about critical thinking. So the talk is cheap, but critical thinking is something that is in absence in our governments. In fact, when we use the word government, it is almost like learning English all over again. So we use languages like emilokon, which is like a first person singular. Enyinlokon is the second person singular. The third one is awalokon, which means that we feel everything, we know everything, we would have to decide collectively how it works. You therefore would not understand this if you do not pay attention to what I intend to do. The teaching method in our school is always the person speaking and everybody writing. The new method of teaching is somebody talks, everybody is thinking. And so you can position it. So that we can understand three major things about moments, messaging, and momentum in how governance operates. I intend to achieve just 7 things quickly. 1, I want to explain the concept of visioning trap. So whenever somebody comes in and says Nigeria is great or be patriotic or what have you, let us discuss the visioning trap. 2nd, I would like to contextualize what they call the game of transitions, transformations, and translations. It may sound esoteric. It's just a triple entendre, a play on words. The 3rd is to present the state of play. In a society as we have right now, melancholy seems to be the necessary game. People like to complain and talk about pains and whatever. There seems to be a sorority of pain. So if somebody does not complain to you, he must be amongst them. It then means that somebody somewhere is not actually looking at things objectively. The 4th point is I want to reinvent the problem definitions and present an approach to how you look at economic sectors. We have about 56 sectors in the economy. I have tried to reduce it down to 14 so that you can understand the interconnectiveness of government and how things work within each other. The 5th one is try to focus on the subject to identify the gaps and how we can pursue prosperity. The 6th one, I'll just share briefly an insight into how to bridge the gaps. And then the 7th one is offer my closing thoughts. So when we talk about economic prosperity, what we're basically talking about are 3 things: economic growth, security, and competitiveness at the level of the sovereign. Often at times, we skip the household part of it in sovereign prosperity. And so there are a few questions you may want to address your mind with, some of which, I must be honest with you, I myself struggle with the answers to. 1, what makes a nation prosperous? What is the ideology and governance approach that drives Nigeria's vision? What are these prosperity indices we seek to unlock? And what are the probabilities for the potentials and possibilities we seek? And the last one, after independence, how do we become independent of the colonial economic structures and systems we inherited? So we got political independence, but the nation is still not economically independent. So frankly, what you see going on in this country today is that we are not dealing with traditional threats as we used to know it. A whole entire basis of understanding cycles and trends have shifted entirely. It is not about this president or that president. It is about understanding the difference between trends and cycles, both from a global position and the geopolitical implications that is affecting us in Nigeria. Everything has changed. Even the way we relate with ourselves in our homes have changed. And that is the thing we are missing. But what is making it very difficult for us is that Nigeria represents what I call a laggard nation. And I used a phrase in 2019, I call it Igboro Chidaru. Street Orenimo. In English, if I can find the nearest word to it, is that a generation has shifted. The thinking hasn't shifted. So when people talk about this thing, I'm talking about vision trap. It says the economic trajectory has long been held in this laggard nation effect. We rely more on past experiences rather than a future view. The tendency to prioritize memories of past achievements over the imagination of where we should be means that there is a disconnect between those who lead and those who are citizens. And as such, the casualty is that there is innovative thinking. It's not just a Twitter post. It is not a component of governance. So while history offers us the benefit of relying on what we've done, like somebody comes up and says he does one bridge, we've replaced tokenism for innovative governance. So somebody opens a toilet in a place like Sulere, and they actually do a commissioning for it. That is the measure of governance you have rather than at that other level. If you're operating at that level, they don't talk about unlocking potentials because it's not capable. Nemo dat quod not habet. You cannot give what you do not have. If you look at what the economic budget concepts are globally, which I put on the other side, which Nigeria focuses on, and you look at what the issues other countries are focusing on, they are worlds apart. We're existing in two different stratospheres. So this backward thinking is where you look at Lagos-Ibadan Bridge. I'm 56 plus. But since I've been a kid, we've been building that Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. We've been repairing it, everything. I would like to know when it is supposed to be completed. But then you look at it also, we talk about Second Niger Bridge, which is still not. You see, we're talking about bridges as if they are gifts you give to people. But it's because we do not understand that economic liberation of this country requires you to link north to the east, to the west, to the south. And you do that through what? Rails. Rail lines are not meant to carry people. They are meant to move what? Goods and services. And so you look at transportation from a different thing. It is not something you give to a region. It is what you do to move resources from where the surplus is to where they're not. Where we produce to where the order should be. If that thinking does not align, you cannot identify gap, neither can you bridge it, or neither can you even unlock potentials. So if you look at what we've been doing, therefore, I say here, when Thomas Edison decided to create the electric light, he could have spent time trying to reinvent and reshape the candle. We spend more time in that. But we even know right now that even for those of us who practice the traditional divination model, you can actually do it right now online. So the consequences of this visioning trap, and I thought I should establish that very well, means that we keep on talking about potentials, possibilities, but we miss the most important point. That yes, there is potentials. Yes, there is possibilities, but we forget the most essential question, which is about probabilities. What is the probability that those potentials will manifest or come to pass? And those probabilities are based on hardcore data. I will share some with you. While I go on with that is that, you see, the single factor narrative is very dangerous. You've had consistently all this country that the country is bad. Pay attention. There's a list of things I've showed you here that is happening in this country currently. But because you are conditioned to think of it in negative terms, it denies you the ability. In actual fact, I would be bold to say that you would only see what you focus your mind to look at. If you see this country as a bad country, or you see there is enough examples to go around you. But if you see it as a country that is able to get things done, you will see those things, and people are actually making advantage of it. So the fundamental questions we have tried to resolve is that, what is the guiding ideology of Nigeria's economic development part? How has the role of the government and private sector been delineated? We struggle with that. The compact between the government and not is there. My position is that the agreement we have under the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is no longer working as intended. There is a lack of trust amongst us, and that particular thing was broken when government interfered in the running of the NESG and its compact with the private sector. Let me talk about the game of transitions, transformations, and translations. And let me expand on this issue about probabilities. You see, whereas anything is possible, it is the probabilities of your priorities that matter in the end. The difference between a nation that succeeds and one that does not succeed is in measuring probabilities. For example, some of you would know about Olufemi Awólọ́wọ̀'s free education, right? Most people consider it free education only because you did not interrogate the details of those contracts which he put together. That was an investment in governance, because then what he did was he paid forward the quality of people that will be contributing to taxation. It is almost similar to you having people go overseas and work in McDonald's or in security companies. They will not contribute to your remittances. But if you actually want to understand how to use JAPA, you must actually ship people out of the country. And so they will be able to earn much more and you will get more remittances. So you will then understand that your human capital is actually your resource. You should actually be the ones shipping them out. So it is not a problem, it's just that you consider it a problem. So everything must be weighed from that thing. So here's the thing. Every time you hear somebody talk to you about a plan, there are three elements of a plan which must be present. One, it must be policy driven. Second, it must have programs. And three, it must have projects. All these three will be costed in a way. And the last time we've done it was when Obasanjo produced the needs and seeds document. Ever since then, we have not had an integrated plan that says this is the end game. We took a look at all those activities and all plans by this country from the days of the structural adjustment program up to date. And you can see virtually all of them have missed outcome. Not one of them met its own goal. Even the seeds won. Currently, there is no current integrated plan that shows the end game for Nigeria today. We do have, however, we have a 2030 digital plan. We have the African Union 2050 document. We have the 2060 African plan, which are being worked on. We have the African Continental Free Trade. We have multiples of documents, but not one integrated one, which should be run from where? Planning. The fiscal policy, when we talk about fiscal, I say, no, monetary is moving, fiscal is not moving. When you talk on the fiscal, we are talking about four principal things. The first thing is trade and investment. The dichotomy is that trade and investment is a separate ministry on its own. It is a ministry that we've never focused on, but that is the singular purpose of the whole fiscal arrangement. But it is entirely a different ministry, and you may not necessarily have been putting your first 11 in that function. Because under that ministry is where all your bilaterals, your multilateral trade agreements are structured with your ministry, foreign affairs ministry. It is also under trade and investment that the most important power in the whole of this world is based. Two things: intellectual property and patents. It is not in any other place, not in your customs. By the way, customs is not supposed to be a revenue generating agency per se. It is meant to be the one that has the data on trade and activities that enables you to determine how to manage your foreign exchange and manage all your flows. They spend less time on the data, but they do have the data, but that is not what it is. On the first side of fiscal policy, you have to focus on all four. That is when the coordinating minister of the economy comes in. It's on those four areas. On the other side, we needed to do only two. Nigeria is doing all three. It is called a trilemma for a purpose. That for one side, you will hit it on the other side. That is why you see every time we pass a policy, it seems to be pulling one leg out whenever we take one leg forward. It is the mismatch of these two sides that represents a fundamental crisis for us. And it's not just about the leadership, it's about the structure of governance. Let me explain that to you. Nigeria runs a British-style civil service. That British-style civil service is operating within an American-style presidential system of governance. The incoherence and the chaotic nature of the two is that the two systems do not talk to each other, which means accountability would not be present, and therefore chaos and incongruence would ensue. And as such, you can then add any other dimensions you see thereafter from it. But that in itself is a fundamental problem. It is not something one president can resolve. It is something we have to find ways to resolve. For example, the civil service was based around the parliamentarian system of accountabilities. But the American system is different. The American system was based around you holding something called a Congressional Budget Office, which is independent enough to hold them accountable, so that you cannot see a project for the space ministry building roads in Shagamu when it should be focused on launching satellites. And so you find that this chaos will continue to exist for so many other reasons. And as such, you find out that we all get distracted. Did you notice in this conversation now? We veered off from purpose. And that is what happens in this country all the time. We are unable to keep track on one singular objective. I'm not sure any of you can remember the first word we said at the beginning. the level of lack of attention to executing and making results is not just a leadership problem, it is a citizenry problem. And we see it every now and then. And so I quickly move on so that we do not waste too much time. So I want to focus on three things where some few things have worked in this country. So let me show you Nigeria, your Nigeria, my Nigeria, where it has worked. For some who may be younger, sometime in 1985, we had a company called NITEL. NITEL was 93.37% owned by the federal government of Nigeria. Wait for it. The 6.7% ownership at the back of it was owned by First Bank. They were the owners of NITEL. Somewhere, somehow, somebody figured it out that we needed to get rid of all the waste that was NITEL. And so we gave up licenses. That's the first singular admission of what government's purpose is. Without raising money, without dipping hands into the budget, this country understood its mission for once, knew that what we needed to do was to have a regulatory agency that gave licensing, understood at the very early stage the principle of the public-private partnership relationship, and we gave licensing, irrespective of the dramas in between. But we gave those licenses out. Some of us were paying 50,000 or more to buy SIM card. For the younger, for the Gen Zs here, it may sound strange to you. We actually queued, not just paid, we queued. We were on waiting list to get SIM card for weeks. But then, this country stayed the course. The messaging was proper. But guess what that thing singularly did? Because of that decision then, we blew our creative industry out of the roofs. Government did not do anything to creative industry to boost it. It was just that decision. Because of that decision, our banks was able to deploy fintech today. Because of that decision, we were able to restructure NIPS, which was able to then make sure that Nigeria has one of the best payment systems in the world. Your settlement, when you make payments, you get it immediately. Some countries are still trying to achieve T1. Because of that singular move as well, we were able to launch EduTech. We were able to expand the whole waves of different services in this country. Because of that singular move as well, we were able to change the lifestyle industry in this country. One move, multiple outcomes. No money spent by government. This country has been a country of great things. It is because we don't remind ourselves often, neither do we understand what has worked for us. From 2008, it took us till 2019 for us to start the 7th train. That 7th train, hopefully, should be completed next year. Now, here's the problem. Forget whatever problem is there. By the time that 7th train is completed next year, I can assure you this country will be running OPEX costs inside that place because we do not have gas feedstock to even drive it very well. Currently, they probably have about 65% in terms of their total utilization. By the time you bring the 7th train up, it will drop to about 44%. Why? Because the largest stock is there. The contracts we have are all in place. We stopped since 2008 taking big decisions anymore. We don't take big decisions anymore. We took small decisions. We now work on tokenism. The other one, not the third big decision we took, was in 2005 when Charles Soludo launched the banking consolidation scheme. Because of that consolidation, we were able to fund big ticket deals. That's why you can see companies like Seplat today, Dangote tomorrow, the other companies, the banks are now able to raise money. Ignore the fact that our NPLs have gone bad, or the fact that the AMCON we created to resolve it now needs bailout itself. That is not so much of the challenge. The key thing is understanding that this nation is able to take big decisions. And when we do take them, we will have some failures. That's okay, but we will get it right. And so where do we see this going forward, therefore? In the last 40 years, the same set of economists that have spoken to you are still the same set of economists in this country. What happened? The same set of economists present to you macro figures, but very few present to you micro figures. We have gotten to the stage in this country right now that the common denominator in an economy is the household. Every decision that's taken, it must be explained in terms of how it affects the household. If they are not providing you that information, maybe some of you may emerge, especially the younger ones. So here's the state of play, and I'll rush this time around. If you look at all these indices, it's not all gloom. Areas where we have problems, it's just a middle margin in between. Where the real challenge is in the translation. If you look at it, the negatives are fairly crude oil production. If you look at the percentage by which it's dropped, they are not so significant. Capital importation is up, foreign direct investment or foreign trade balance is up. The misery index moved up by 40%. That's significant. That is bad. That is what is affecting everybody currently now. Misery index. But then maybe what they should do is to pay attention to these micro figures. If you look, when they said they increase people's money by 70%, there is a simple explanation to this. Your income is either stagnated or not growing, but your expenses is growing at an exponential rate. That is not good for industry. Talk less of an individual, because then you have goods in your warehouses which you are not selling, companies are not going to deliver. But the main challenge really is one major area that bothers you. Do you know that in certain places, your cost of electricity is higher than your house rent? That defies any economic notion, but there's a reason behind it, and it's all about phases. Nigeria has always been growing from 1999 to date. The change occurred from 2015 to date, where we've had our worst positions. So let me tell you more about the positive things in there. So here's how to reinvent the problem. Seeking to reimagine. A problem is a question or situation raised to inspire thought, not to query anybody. So if we want to know what the real problem is, we can ask ourselves a simple question. Are we dealing with a national problem, or are we dealing with an empire problem? I will explain that for you in this chart. So if you look at the possibilities here, we have 14 different sectors now. Some of you know about the blue economy, right? We even have a minister in that particular ministry. But the blue economy is far bigger than a ministry. It takes away from fisheries in agriculture. It brings about the naval security. It brings about so many things. But if you take a look at this whole economy, I've listed it for you, and we have computed that Nigeria can actually deliver a 1 trillion economy. It is not a wishful thinking. That is the possibility, right? But the probability of doing so is actually 35%. So we need to reverse this in. So there is hope. Nigeria can actually achieve 1 trillion. There are some examples of the enablers here as I rush. But there are some few things I must have to be saying. For those who keep on talking about Nigeria and you want to understand it, pay attention to what is being done. It is important to look at what is done. Then on the other side, look at what needs to be done so that we can balance the two. It always makes for a decent argument that way. And I've listed quite a few here. And we also looked at a model here when we talk about reforms. I looked at two major things around the messaging. And before I say this, there's something fundamental in everybody talking about liquidity. So there are two things. Under President Umaru Yar'Adua, may so rest in peace, there was an exercise conducted by a few persons, of which I was privileged to know about, to look at what Nigeria owns and see how can we bank them. That exercise delivered two things. We were able to identify what Nigeria owns and also what Nigeria owes. Here's the problem. Those things Nigeria own are illiquid and they cannot be converted to cash. What Nigeria owes are liquid and immediately payable. You see, the two conundrum, therefore, is the liquidity gap in this country. So that means you are holding on to assets which you cannot monetize, which then leads to the question of financialization or securitization. But yet, your budget every year gets money pumped into those assets which are not useful assets for you. And so the question is just that simple thing. So we took a look to summarize this in and looked at this messaging of unlocking talents. It says, in May 29, 2023, there was a challenge with, the moment was right. Those decisions were not the problem. It was a case of the moment not having a messaging to back it or sequencing and then momentum missing. There was no momentum, it was lost. In fact, it delivered a negative momentum. that led to what you call the end bad governance, whatever. Today, there is an opportunity for a new message. We can use what happened yesterday or Sunday and send a new message that Nigeria is now ready to confront its economic challenges. But the message must be one of aspiration rather than just inspiration. You cannot inspire when people are perspiring. And we then do that message, and then we figure it out, and then we can therefore build a momentum for the change. In summary, therefore, my message to everyone is that pay attention and look. Every time you complain about exits from Nigeria, track the entries into Nigeria. Every time you complain that it is bad, ask yourself why your Lebanese brothers, my Chinese brothers, are all coming back to this country. Every generation faces a period. My generation is the lost generation. That generation, we should protect it. Thank you very much.